Most people think they have a negativity problem. But here's what's actually happening inside your head, and it's going to change the way you see yourself completely. Your brain isn't broken. It isn't weak. It isn't wired against you. It's doing something far more precise than that. It's executing a program you've been quietly writing for years, one thought at a time, one worry at a time, one sleepless night at a time. And the surprising part? It's gotten incredibly good at it. Here's what neuroscience has understood for decades, that most self-help content conveniently skips over. Research suggests that imagined threats can trigger stress responses that resemble those caused by real threats. To your nervous system, replaying an embarrassing conversation from 3 years ago activates the same stress response as standing at the edge of a cliff. Your brain treats your thoughts as reality, and if your most practiced thoughts are the dark ones, the ones that spiral, catastrophize, assume the worst, then your brain has essentially built a highway to that place. Wide lanes, no traffic, a smooth ride, straight into chronic worry. That's not a character flaw. That's neuroplasticity, working exactly as designed. The same mechanism that allows a pianist to play without looking at their hands is the same mechanism that makes negative thinking feel automatic. You've rehearsed it, consciously or not. So before you try to fix your thinking with affirmations or forced gratitude journals, it's worth understanding what you're actually dealing with. You're not fighting your personality. You're navigating a deeply grooved neural habit, and habits, unlike personalities, can be changed. The reason most attempts at reshaping thought patterns fail isn't lack of willpower or motivation. It's that people skip straight to the destination without understanding the route. They hear "think positive" and try to plaster cheerful thoughts over anxious ones. But your brain isn't fooled. It can feel the gap between what you're telling it and what it actually believes. That gap creates resistance, and resistance creates exhaustion, and exhaustion makes you give up. This is why people will do a week of journaling and then declare themselves a lost cause. The real shift, the one that actually sticks, isn't about replacing dark thoughts with bright ones. It's about building a different relationship with your thoughts altogether. Think about this for a second. When a thought shows up in your mind, what's your instinct? Most people either fuse with it, they become the thought, they believe it completely, they act on it, or they fight it. They argue back, they try to suppress it, they tell themselves they shouldn't be thinking this way. But here's something behavioral psychology keeps coming back to. You cannot successfully argue yourself out of a feeling. You can only redirect attention, and you can only do that if you first created some distance from the thought itself. That distance is what changes everything. Have you ever noticed how different it feels to say, "I am anxious" versus "I notice I'm having anxious thoughts right now"? On the surface, they sound similar, but cognitively, they activate entirely different responses. The first statement merges you with the emotion. The second creates an observer, a part of you that's watching the emotion rather than becoming it. That tiny linguistic shift is the doorway to what psychologists call metacognition, the ability to think about your own thinking. And it's one of the most underrated mental skills a person can develop. This is where real emotional intelligence actually lives. Not in being positive, not in staying calm all the time, but in that fraction of a second between stimulus and response, in your ability to pause, to notice what's happening, and to make a deliberate choice rather than an automatic one. The first real step in rewiring thought patterns isn't doing anything, it's watching. For most people, negative thinking is so automatic that they don't even register it as thinking. It just feels like reality. Worry doesn't announce itself as a cognitive distortion. It just feels like seeing things clearly. This is why catching the thought before you're already deep inside it is a skill that has to be built slowly and deliberately. What helps enormously is starting to identify the conditions that trigger automatic negative spirals for you specifically. For a lot of people, those conditions involve comparison, scrolling through social media at night when they're already tired, or sitting in traffic with nothing to distract them, or having unstructured alone time. These aren't random. There are predictable windows in every person's day where the mind goes to its most practiced places. Recognizing yours gives you advance warning. You can't stop a wave, but you can learn to see it coming. And when you do catch a negative thought cycle starting, that moment when your brain begins its familiar loop of, "What if this fails?" or "I knew I wasn't good enough for this." The move is not to engage with the content. This is counterintuitive, but it's critical. Engaging with the logic of anxious thoughts, trying to reason through them or prove them wrong, actually strengthens them. It's like trying to wash mud off your hands in muddy water. You need to step away from the stream entirely. What breaks the loop isn't argument. It's pattern interruption. And the fastest way to interrupt a mental pattern is through the body. This isn't vague wellness advice. It's grounded in how the nervous system actually functions. Your physical state and your mental state are in constant communication. Change one, and you shift the other. A slow exhale activates the parasympathetic nervous system, literally signaling to your brain that there's no immediate threat. Standing up and walking across the room changes your sensory environment. Unclenching your jaw, rolling your shoulders back, pressing your feet into the floor, these aren't distractions. They're interruptions to a neurological pattern. That's usually the reaction, but consider how much of your mental suffering has been made worse by thinking harder about it. Sometimes the intervention isn't more thinking, it's a deliberate departure from the thinking loop altogether. Once you've learned to catch and interrupt, the next layer is learning to redirect, not toward forced positivity, but toward accuracy. This distinction matters more than people realize. Negative thinking is almost always distorted thinking. It's not that everything is fine and your brain is making up problems. It's that your brain is consistently, predictably pulling toward the worst-case interpretation of uncertain situations. The antidote to distortion isn't fake optimism, it's precision. So if your brain offers you, "This project is going to be a disaster," you don't replace it with, "Everything is going to be amazing." You replace it with, "I don't have enough information to predict the outcome." If your brain says, "That person thinks I'm an idiot," you replace it with, "I don't actually know what they think." You're not dismissing the concern. You're just refusing to let your brain treat a guess as a fact. Over time, and this is what makes the process genuinely exciting if you commit to it, this kind of grounded redirecting becomes more natural. Your brain is always going to generate a first draft, but you get increasingly good at editing it. What happens to daily life when this shift starts taking hold? The most common thing people report isn't euphoria. It's more like quiet. A reduction in the mental noise that was always there but they'd stopped noticing. Decision-making becomes less exhausting because you're not running every option through a catastrophe filter. Conversations feel lighter because you're not constantly monitoring for signs of disapproval or judgment. You might notice you're sleeping better, not because life got easier, but because you're no longer spending your last hour of consciousness rehearsing worst-case scenarios. Your relationships change too. When you're not in a constant low-grade state of threat detection, you become more present with the people you care about. You're actually listening instead of half-listening while your brain runs parallel commentary. The people in your life may notice before you do. There's something worth sitting with here, something that tends to land differently for different people, but lands for almost everyone eventually. The thoughts that have caused you the most suffering, they were never as reliable as they felt. They were just loud. They were just practiced. They were just the path of least resistance for a brain that was very efficiently doing what you had, without realizing it, trained it to do. That means the version of you who thinks more clearly, reacts less automatically, and moves through the world with a little more ease. That version isn't waiting to be discovered. It's waiting to be trained into existence, one deliberate moment at a time. If something in this shifted something for you, I'd genuinely love to know. Drop your thoughts in the comments, even if it's just one thing that clicked. And if you're going to try working with your thinking patterns over the next several weeks, share that too. It helps to say it out loud, even in a comment section. If this kind of content is what you're looking for, subscribing keeps it in your feed, and a like tells me this topic is worth going deeper on.